Good.
Bored.
That one didn't go on my bad.
I still there. I think that's going to put me off from working for control. Right. Before we begin, I want to get some impression over what you're thinking of doing for assignment 1. So we start with Morgan at the back and work our way around.
I'm going to do Fallout 4.
What exactly are you intending to do, Morgan?
I'm probably going to do the beginning. Go with the...
Right the way through cutscenes also?
Yeah.
Okay.
To get a feel for what it's like to create a character and...
Oh, well that's
make a
interesting.
class.
You're going to go through the character select stuff.
Yeah, I'll make a class, I'll put my special points in, and I'll give you a glimpse of combat as well.
Okay, that's good.
A beginner's experience.
Can I make a suggestion?
Go on.
When you're editing, speed up the cinematic stuff,
Oh yeah.
because it's far less interesting than the other stuff that you're
Yeah,
doing.
quite
So
often.
to fit into the time, just run through that fairly quickly. But that's sort of character select stuff and positioning yourself as a character is interesting in itself. So yeah, that'll be good. Cheska,
Do we have to start from the beginning then? We don't have to...
you can start. You can be at any point you wish.
I think I might do one of the Witcher DLCs then, because
Okay.
I really like how the game has like got like a bard narrating it, so it's like really meta because it's like a story in a story, and you
Mhm.
play as like Geralt, and it's all based on like Polish folklore, so there's like historical context in it. I don't know, I think that'd be quite interesting.
What's your focus here?
I don't really know for sure.
I mean, there's a lot of things that you can pick up on here and pull out and discuss at some length. So I'm not particularly concerned in any way, shape or form. And because you're positioning something which is story within story, it gives you scope to discuss the relationship you have with the original text and how you're developing it with this text and so on. There's a characterization aspect in something like Witcher, any DLC of Witcher or the Witcher games themselves would be really, really straightforward to talk about. So yeah, there's nothing problematic here, put it like that. But yeah, have a think about what direction you want to take with it, that's all.
Yeah.
Because it'll just make it more focused, easier for me to give you marks if it's focused. Josh?
Yeah, so for my video, I'm thinking for now, if I do Dead Space, and I can talk quite a lot about how subjective player experience is in quite a cinematic single-player story like that.
Interesting. Unpack your thoughts a little bit about that.
So I think it was last lecture we were talking about how different people can come up with different experiences and
Yep.
feelings from what they play. And a single-player game is sort of created to mediate certain feelings and experiences, whether or not some people walk out with the same messages or not. I was wondering if I could go into any detail on that in something like Dead Space.
I think you can, yeah. It's it's an interesting concept in itself. You're given a singular experience, which in theory, if you look at something like Dead Space, all of us should experience it in the same way, but we don't. That's the truth of it. We don't experience in the same way. And there's lots of trajectories you can go on, Josh, with regards to unpicking that. You can focus on yourself with regards to what you bring to the game experience and how that mediates your experience of being embodied in that character in that time. Or you can look at your experience with the game itself, because obviously this is something you're not picking it up off the shelf and playing it for the first time. So you can discuss some of your experiences with it and how you have built a relationship with the text, with the character, and so on. And you could do a mix of those two elements, really. So there's loads of interesting ways to go through it, I think. It's coming back, right? There's a remaster coming out very shortly.
Next year, something like that.
Is it next? I was under the impression it's like this year.
I have no idea. I know that it's being done.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I saw something last week because it was like, ooh, I'm getting that, and I'm thinking it's like November.
Right.
So that might be worth. I don't know. It'll be outside the scope of this, perhaps, but never mind. But it might be something to reflect on, I suppose. It'd be easier to do that in the essay rather than this. No, Dead Space will work well. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Dan.
I was probably gonna do Overwatch 2.
Yep.
Just because it's like quite straightforward, and it's like there's a pretty simple focus to the game, and it's not like too complicated, so I can just
Be easy to make.
yeah, basically.
What would you want to focus on in terms of discussion?
Because like a lot of people seem to be doing like single player games, where you can kind of just focus on, I don't know, the storyline more than anything else and the characters in it. If I was going to do a multiplayer game, I'd just want there to be, I don't know, maybe just like a straightforward like run through the start of like any other game and just explain what's going on, and maybe like how the team kind of organises itself and communication based, that kind of thing.
That's good. Yeah, looking at the social aspects,
Yeah, like
looking at the what's the word? I'm searching for a word and it's not coming to me. Collaborative aspects of play, yeah. Which reflects nicely on last week's stuff. You can bring a lot about theories of play and how the notion of play with others is really important in these games and how it develops and the sort of the mechanisms that you go through. And I think week 5 is going to be interesting for you as well with regards to ideas of co-presence and social presence in games. Traditionally, when we think of presence in games, it's been down this alleyway of like we get into this optimal state called flow, this optimal psychological state where we feel cut off from the rest of the world because we're so immersed in this thing. But your example here actually lends itself to different kinds of presence, like co-presence and social presence, and a different set of experiences. Yeah, that'd be great. Eve.
Red Dead Redemption 2. That's what I'm gonna do.
And what's your experiences of going around Valentine and
Watching my dad play it, watching my boyfriend's little brother play it.
Okay, and you're going to play it now. Okay, are you going to show us from the start?
I don't know.
You don't know. When are you going to start playing it?
I was gonna start this week because my boyfriend's downloaded onto the PS5.
Lovely. Good. It's a monolithic game, right? You're not going to be far into it by the time you have to make this thing, but yeah, it's a good game to do. And if you haven't got a focus, what I would suggest is give it a go. The classic one with something like this would be, because it's only one character, everyone plays as the same character. It's a bit like Josh was saying with Dead Space, right? But in this sense, the character itself has been built to be iconic. As almost as well, you can draw this back to semi-optics. Charles Sanders Peirce talked about 3 different kinds of sign that we have. There's the symbolic sign, there's the iconic sign, there's the indexical sign. And the construction of Arthur Morgan is a series of indexical and iconic signs, basically. They've just put together an identikit Old West gunslinger, basically, for you to embody in particular ways. And a lot of people, go on about the story of Red Dead Redemption, how epic in scope it is. It could have been written by an 8-year-old. In all truth, it's such a set of narrative tropes.
Yeah.
The moral dilemmas that the character goes through are not particularly interesting.
Yeah.
They're kind of interesting to play out, though. I think that's the difference here. If it was a film, Red Dead Redemption 2 would be really boring. It would be stupid. You'd think, like, why are primary school children being allowed to write and direct films? But playing through it gives a different dimension. So what I would suggest you do is go on it, have a play through some of the early missions, get yourself out of the mountains, because that's boring. But it don't take very long. Get down into the little town and go from there.
Okay.
Ben?
I'm thinking the campaign of Modern Warfare 2019 and kind of focusing on how how they had lots of missions in that in particular where they really forced you to either witness or play out very polarizing things, especially like the terrorist attacks, the points where you could potentially shoot a child, all these other things, and
See, I have no problem with shooting children. Better to shoot the child, right? What have they done? Nothing. They've not contributed anything. Shoot an adult, they might have done cool shit. Children, they've done nothing. They're just sponges. They're leech. I've got no problem with it. It'd be interesting to see you defend that viewpoint. But this would work. No, but in terms of scope, obviously a mission in Modern Warfare, they vary in length.
it's gonna be more of like a compilation of different scenes rather than necessarily just one mission in particular.
Okay.
So I think I'm gonna focus a lot.
And there's no reason why you can't do that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's really good. Because it does. If you're doing a video for this, although a Let's Play is traditionally a linear thing, if you want to cut, by all means do that. Okay. We've got to make allowances here for basically the university's assessment policies, where you say you can't submit 3-hour video or something like that. So yeah, I haven't got a problem with that. And that would work well. And there's, I think in the context of that, you're almost setting yourself up to put some limits on what you can talk about. But as long as you've got a clear direction, I think that works really well. Nick?
Yeah, there seems cool.
There's billions of things you can talk about. Have you got anything in particular that you want to focus on?
I think since obviously it's like there's not really any like tasks or anything you have to do, it's quite free play. I'll talk about how like the reward is having like a control like into your own storylines and stuff.
Mhm.
Go into detail with that, I think.
I think you could do something really interesting in terms of the video as well about that control aspect. Not so much like getting your Sims to do mad things, although that would be cool. But there's a lot of different ways you can exemplify that theme. And even if you were quite singular in terms of the theme you explore, as long as you're exploring it in interesting ways, I'm quite happy with that. And you're differentiating what that actually means to you as a player.
Yeah.
Jordan.
Same here, but I think I'm gonna maybe start again, create new Sims and kind of see whether, projecting my own sort of desires for life onto these Sims and
Brilliant.
seeing how successful.
I was hoping somebody was going to do this. Make yourself.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're so narcissistic. But this is fab. There's a few games actually we talked about this morning where you can make yourself, Morgan, to an extent you could do that, in terms of the character, although Fallout doesn't necessarily allow you to be very specific in that way. But Sims in particular, you can go hog wild, and because so many people do that. It's weird. It's a weird dichotomy between people who play games like Sims to be something else, and people who play it to be themselves. And of course, you're allowed to do both things ostensibly at the same time in Sims as well. So because it is pluralized at the end of the day, it's not like you're just making one thing. Yeah. So it opened gate for a good project, I think. Last but not least, Mason.
Yeah, I'm sort of still thinking, but I was thinking games that are sort of more text narrative based, for example like Oregon Trail or something, and see if it enhances your experience.
Have you played it before?
I played a little bit of it the other week.
Okay, what did you make of it?
Some of the keys are a bit wonky, but
it takes some getting used to, right?
especially when you're trying to head to stuff, it's a bit wonky, those keys.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Did you die of dysentery yet?
No, I didn't get to die yet.
It's the classic cutscene in Oregon Trail where your whole camp dies of dysentery at one point, yeah, which is not great. I don't know if you all know what dysentery is, but it's not nice. That'd be really interesting. And what if you go down that route, what you can develop in a video, I think, which would be really, really interesting, would be if you can think of a comparison between something contemporary that you've played and contextualize what you're doing in that classic environment within what you would normally do as a player and then the games that you would ordinarily play as a player. That would add a dimension to, you know, sort of how you understand the game itself, because our context for understanding a game that we play is always the other games we play. You know, we don't come in blind. Even Eve now is going to be picking up Red Dead Redemption 2, right? Your understanding of that as a game is going to come from the other games that you've played or seen, you know. And so we do this with everything. It's that little 5 minutes at the beginning of playing something when you have to get used to the controls because you're wired to the last thing that you played. So last night, my sister, she's so lovely, she sent me a birthday present weeks early, Far Cry 6. She knows. Put it in, nice, sitting there, some dick comes and rings the doorbell. I'm like, I'm not happy now, but I've gone onto the doorbell. Come back to it. It took 20 minutes to get back used to the controls because they're quite specific, and Ubisoft as a company have this slightly odd control system for things. I'm fine now, but for the first like 20 minutes I'm crouching when I'm supposed to be running because crouch isn't, for some reason, press down on right stick, it's press down on circle, and I'm like, okay, my fingers are a bit, they need a bit of training here, and then it comes, right? And I think when you apply it to something very different, like, you know, maybe a 40-year-old game, in fairness, that becomes doubly so. You know, your expectations and your, you know, you're saying about the keys, they were always like that, I will say that, but you've got really used to them because that's the way you used to play. It's not, even if you're a PC gamer, that's not how things are done anymore. It's a very rudimentary system. So there's a lot to be said there, Mason, in terms of the interface as well, and you know, how you think about, I'm positioned here, the game is here, we link through this physical interface of things, and if it's janky, that can really pull us out of the experience. But that pulling out the experience is quite valuable, actually. It's like in yesterday, I'm not quite with it, which draws my attention to other things. You know, it kind of pulls me out of the experience a bit, and I'm starting to think about other things about the game because I'm struggling with the controls. As soon as I get the controls, I'm in, and that other stuff disappears a bit. You know, including like any other people or the world around me or my mother trying to ring me on the phone. Yeah, that's gone. So, you know, there's in that kind of idea of the interface is something we can all think about a bit as well. In particular, I mean, Eve's going to be doing Red Dead Redemption 2, right? She hasn't done it before. She's going to suck. The first hour is going to be painful for her. That first shootout in the mountains, she's going to die several times. As you get, and it's actually a pretty good control system for that game, but it will take a little bit of getting used to. You know, it genuinely, you know, where your hand should be on the controller, what you should be doing. These are all interesting things that Eve's in a good position to pull out of it. But for the rest of us, that might be a little more difficult, but it's something we can all think about in terms of how we interact with the interface that we're using as well. Okay, this will be from, by a show of hands, how many of you did Reese's module last year? Oh, not that many. Okay, that's cool. You'll be quite familiar with what's, I mean, I've expanded what I was talking about last year because obviously it's necessary to do so. This is more fundamental than what I was talking about with Reese's lecture last year. But the basic gist of this is pretty much the same. The reason why I've positioned this lecture at this stage of the course is really because of what I talk about at the end of this lecture. The idea of why games ask us to do the things that they do. And it obviously, Ben, resonates really. I think yours is the clearest example of what we just did a round table talk about. Modern Warfare asks you to do a number of very specific things and puts you in morally compromised situations. But there is a reason why they are doing that. You know, there is both a legitimization of militarism, but also I think a desire on the part of the developers as well to have players think about the moral implications of pretty closely mapped on, missions. You know, a lot of those would be, I don't think they're one-to-one, but the ideas come from military missions themselves. So in that, the game is asking us to do particular things. And you know, Dead Space is a good example there, where it's almost like what we call a rail game, right? You don't have a huge amount of agency in terms of how you progress through the game. So it is always asking you to do stuff based on the logic of how the game has been put together itself. So that's really the focus of what I want to talk about today. Why is this not working? Oh, it's because I'm not pressing the right thing. I want to talk about digital worlds, first of all, and how world building is an incredibly important part of the game experience. Even for something which becomes a bit of a blank slate. The Sims is built as a world. Right? It's an environment that you are put in. You have not an infinite, but a finite number of possibilities to customize that in particular ways. In something like The Sims, you are being asked to a certain extent to build that world, but they guide you as to how that can be done. Something like Dead Space, you are given that world. Witcher, you are given it. Even although Fallout is customizable, I think arguably the entire environment itself, you know, there's very little you can do to the shape of the whole thing. You are embodying within it, although you are given some scope as to how you go about that and what manner you do it in. Now, when things are built in that manner, the building of them is always going to embody a certain ideological position. This is inevitable because the people who make this stuff have ideologies, just like all of us have ideologies. This is impossible to avoid. First question, what is an ideology? Back to MS100, people. And of course your sessions with the venerable Professor Merrin last, he's not professor and he's never fucking gonna be either the way he behaves, but Dr. Merrin last year. Oh shit. I gotta take that fucking idiot out tonight to watch the football. Bollocks! Alright. What would William argue perhaps that ideology is? Don't all rush now.
Set of beliefs or a belief system subjective to a group or one individual.
Bloody hell. Check out Miss Big Brain over here. That's pretty much spot on. Just say it again, Jordan, just so people can take a note if you don't know what it is.
A set of beliefs or a belief system subjective to a group of people or one individual.
Yeah. Ideologies can be shared, obviously, so a group of people, that's quite important, and the notion of shared ideology is obviously the focus really for media studies and ideology, how ideologies are created and shared in the media as discourse in order to get people to agree with a particular position. But they are held at an individual and a group societal level as well. And, the key is always in the beginning of the word, right? Idea. A particular belief or idea about how the world should be. Ideologies don't have to correspond to how something is. They can be projected on top of. But they serve the purpose of explaining the world to us in a particular way. The difference, of course, with digital games is you have the opportunity to create an environment in which that ideology is mechanically part of the environment itself. So if you have a particularly strong ideology, you can design the world to, if you like, run on that ideological position. So, to go back to The Sims, it's not an accident who makes The Sims. Who does?
EA?
EA. What do we know about EA as a company? Electronic Arts.
And naughty.
They are the worst company in the world.
Wait, whoa. Unpack that one.
They've taken all my money.
They're naughty. How, Jessica, are they a naughty company?
Because they make expansion packs, and it's like, a few years ago, did you play Sims 3 and like the other ones?
Yeah, I've spent
Yeah.
money that I shouldn't have in Sims.
You used to get more in the packs, and now it's like you buy the vampires pack and you get like barely anything in it. You have to buy another one to make it worth it, and it's just like.
That's bad.
Mm.
Why is it? do you have any agency as a human being, Jessica? Or did anyone force you to do this? I think there's a serious point there. I think the game does force you to do this.
Oh yeah.
If you want to make progress, you don't really have a choice of this. It's this freemium model, right? You play for free, but if you actually want to play seriously, you've got to invest, or you don't really get anywhere. And you want to get somewhere. So yeah, EA are not a particular. Do we have any FIFA players in here?
God, no.
Thank God for that. It's a marvellous story. A mutual friend of Will and I. She has a son. He must be 13 now. A couple of years ago, he'd been fair play to the lad, right? He'd been saving for ages to buy a PS5 before it came out, and he knew it was going to top out about 400 quid, so he'd actually got the money together. He must have only been like 11, 12. It's a good effort. And then one day, his mother had a credit card statement come through as an email. FIFA player. He'd spent 500 quid on her credit card on credits for FIFA. This would be FIFA 22, right? No, 21, I think. And she went ballistic, obviously. She went absolutely spent. One, he pinched her credit card, which is one thing, right? To 500 quid. And I think the third point, which didn't enter into her analysis, was he still blew. After all that money, he was still not very good at FIFA. I mean, I whooped his ass, and I haven't played FIFA in a very long time. And I was like, I absolutely caned him. He was crap. So, I asked, well, the postscript of the story is he still doesn't have a PS5 because she took the money and paid off the credit card. He still hasn't got one. Poor kid. He's not missing much. They haven't released that much good stuff for it yet. I digress a little. EA as a company is renowned for this kind of behaviour, where progress on games that they have open platforms for, and your progress is tied basically to how much you're willing to spend on it. This is why I very rarely engage with Electronic Arts in anything, to be honest. I do still play, to my eternal shame, NHL hockey games, but I don't pay anything, but I just like the combination of sport and fighting. It's great, my favourite it's in my top 3 games of all time is NHL 94, which is, go play it, it's amazing, it's the most amazing game. Anyway, the ideological position of Electronic Arts has been, really, since the early 90s, milk these dumb bastards for every penny that they've got. They established their model in 91, when they released the first John Madden Football. And in 92, they released John Madden Football 92. Exactly the same game. No change. They were still bad back in the day. They literally didn't make any changes at all. 93 had some different coloured sprites and a different sort of start screen, and that was it. And these were flying out of the door. People were like, yeah, gotta get Madden 93. Why? It's the same game. It's identical. What are you talking about? It is, and like they've made like 3 engine changes to Madden in like 30 years. That's it. They've done nothing to that game. The one that's out now is identical to the one that was out 6 years ago. It's going to sell like 10 million copies. It does every year. People queue up to buy it. People are morons. Ideologically, the developers have a fundamental position that they're taking here. So I just, I stuck up a few things which are examples of the world. I mean, okay, Rockstar, right? They have an ideological position. You might think that their ideological position is quite anarchic because, there's this idea that, the Grand Theft Auto series is quite anarchic. Well, actually, when you boil it down, all the Grand Theft Auto games ask you to do is get rich. That's it. The whole purpose of the game is really fundamentally not a hell of a lot different to something like Pac-Man. You just accumulate as much as you can. You get to an end point when you've got as much as you can get, basically. You kind of top out at the end, you can't get any more. Something like, I've got Mario World there. There's a really problematic ideological position in all the Mario games. There's a fundamental relationship to hallucinogenic drugs, first of all, which needs exploration. Mario eats what to get big?
Mushroom.
Indeed. This is not accidental, right? Mario takes mushrooms, and all of a sudden he's here. I don't think you guys have taken mushrooms, but it does weird things to your perception of the world around you. Makes you feel perhaps a little more than you are at other times. Everyone's so up again. Mario's a Magi player. Yeah, he is. But there's something. What is the purpose of every Mario game?
Colonisation.
No. That's too ideological. Think more pragmatically. I'm not. There is a colonisation aspect of Mario. There's no question. Albeit, you are asked to fight colonisers as well, pretty often.
Yeah.
But there's something. Take it down a step.
Save
What do you
Princess.
actually always asked to do in Mario games?
Save Princess Peach.
What does that tell you about Princess Peach?
She's weak.
Damsel in distress.
Well, she's a dumbass. She's always getting her ass kidnapped. Princess. If I was Mario, I'd be moving on. I mean, she is trouble, that woman, right? She is a magnet for trouble. Again, you position like Princess Peach is like literally the only female character in Mario. She is always in trouble.
Yeah, but Zelda and Link are the exact same thing. as
Of course
well,
they are,
in
yeah.
some ways.
It's like Link is always bothering his ass trying to save Zelda. Why didn't Zelda calm down?
I know.
Chill it out, get a cottage, grow some vegetables or shit in the world in which it exists. That seems like a pastoral existence that could happen. But no. She's always putting herself out there to be. This is all designed. And it's interesting to me, perhaps the society of the 80s, when actually both games were developed in the early 80s, I'm not going to argue that it would be more acceptable positioning women in games at that time as that way, but perhaps it was more acceptable as a society to do that in the early 80s. That was 40 years ago. And yet still, you have this trope of female characters in games as being helpless, weaker, etc., etc. That's an ideological position. That patriarchal position that a lot of games, you might think, what are the roots of Gamergate? Well, 6-year-old boys playing Mario is a good start to start looking for that. That's a really good place to start thinking about why. There's misogyny in gaming culture. What do you play? What are you socialised to playing at the beginning of being a gamer? These sort of canonical classic games, which are marketed at kids. Look at the colour scheme, come on. That's a kid's game. And, you know, these games do embody particular ideological positions. And you think, well, do kids understand that? Not only do they understand it, but they are enacting it. The big difference between games and how ideology works in other texts, like newspapers, film, etc., is, to a certain, I don't want to say quite passive, because we all know the arguments about passive and active audiences, but we are engaged in a different way in a video game to when we're receiving other texts. That much we do know. And if you are being asked, you know, grind out 30 hours of play in Super Mario World in order to, you know, rescue a woman who couldn't help herself getting kidnapped by a fucking fire-breathing dragon, like, I know, you know, it's dressed up in a particular way, but, you know, these things are always there. I only put in the Just Cause world as well, because that also has mad ideological. I always find that people haven't played it, so each video game builds a world. Okay? Now, even really basic stuff I sort of put links to in week 1, there's a world being created there for us to exist in and play within at a particular point in time. They can be very basic, but nevertheless, when you create a game, when you create a space for something to be done in, a world of a kind is being created. Some are better than others. Now, Oregon Trail was, I think, I think it's fair to say the first game that really tried to do this on a bigger scale. You know, that said, right, here's a task which we're going to extend in a particular way. I know it's very basic, but it creates a sense of worldhood because you have a goal, and to go through that goal you have to interact with it in a narrative format, and therefore it builds contours to the world that we're in. You should always consider that every game has a spatial aspect to it, and as soon as you have a spatial aspect to something, you are involved in some kind of world-building activity. So, games always tell stories through the creation of space and our experience of space. For the videos, I think that is something everyone should explore in some way. What kind of space are you in? I mean, Eve's got a really good choice here. Because one thing that Rockstar do as a company is spend a hell of a lot of time thinking about that space and how it's constructed. I think it's problematic. And everyone says, like, you know, Rockstar games are really expansive. You know, a huge world. I always get this impression with Grand Theft Auto 5. If you go on one of the top buildings and just have a look around, the city's tiny. It's like the size of Neath. It should be like Grand Theft Auto Treorchy or something like that. It should be called, because it's a really small space. It's like spatial bigger. You can't build that big. You know, you can't have a genuine city because you, as a gameplay, you'd never explore it. I mean, we all live in Swansea, right? Do you know everything about? Have you been everywhere in Swansea? Believe me, you don't want to. And there's, you know, I've lived around here all my life. There are bits of Swansea I've never been to. It's like there's the legendary area of Gendros. It's like, just a fucking name. I don't want to go Gendros. You know what I'm talking about. You know, I've never been to Garden Village. It sounds beautiful. I know it's not. It's between Forest Park and the sign that it's bound to be crap. But I've never been there. You know. We, in normal life, we are, you know, we're spatial beings and we explore space in particular ways. In the game itself, our experience of the game is very importantly tied to the space that's been created. And the narrative itself flows through that. You might think with something like Oregon Trail, there's not much space creation going on here, but actually, through the story and this sort of connection between story and space, you are building that world of the game always. You know, you are always being given details about, you know, the river that you're crossing over, and you know, all this sort of stuff. So this, goes back to some of the stuff I was talking last week about the magic circle. In terms of thinking of those classical theories of play, the idea that you can build an expansive, entirely new world kind of does resonate a little with the magic circle, because that's what, Huizinga was talking about when he said, this privileged space for play. You can have imagination, and you can go nuts, what Montola says is that games actually act to expand our magic circles, or what Mike and I actually argue is that they get rid of them altogether. Actually, the world itself becomes something that we believe in completely. It's no different to this. It's simply just another formulation of how we experience the world itself. The video game world can be just as meaningful as this experience to us when we're in it. It's not different, it's not separate from, the power and the importance of creating a space and narratology in games can have that effect. Virtual world always has these three characteristics. You have to have interactivity, you have to have physicality, and you have to have persistence. What do these mean? Interactivity, what we do is reflected in that world itself. At a very basic level, this can mean mixing in with physicality a little, that we have control over a character. And as the haptics of game controllers have moved on over the years, we have feedback in terms of that physicality as well. But interactivity, it does not just mean we control something and it does what we control. Interactivity also means how we react, as in Dan's case, with other people in the game, or when you come to play, how you react with non-playable characters and other aspects of the environment too. The environment, in order for it to be meaningful, must be tangible. When we do something, the environment changes in some way. And the persistence aspect, it really relates, I think the best example is you guys with The Sims. You start a game with The Sims, you can go on for years and years and years. You can follow those characters through. You can kill them off, but you still got the same world where you can put other Sims into. There's a persistent aspect to this. Some games obviously finish. We stop there, although that's becoming less and less common now. You finish the story and you can still be part of that environment afterwards. And that is odd behaviour. We see people doing Let's Plays of Red Dead Redemption, and they finished the story ages ago. They are literally just riding around, having interactions with non-playable characters. It's like, do you not have anything better to do with your time? Have you no goals? Have you got nothing? People seem to love this. As long as something has these characteristics, we can call it a virtual world. Therefore, we can see that pretty much every game that you would play has those characteristics. You have some level of interactivity. There's no game I can think of where you can't interact in some way. Although I'm getting into these, The Simpsons did a whole bunch of parodies of video games in the 90s. And in the crossover episode they did with, has anyone, you guys probably don't even know about this film, there was a film in the 90s called Waterworld. Anyone ever heard of it? It was a Kevin Costner movie when Kevin Costner was a big Hollywood star. And it was the most expensive film ever made. At the time, this must be 95, something like that. It was a total piece of shit, this film, right? It was dreadful. And it cost at the time about $150 million, and it bombed completely. It was boring, it was dull, and so on. And there's an episode of The Simpsons where Milhouse is playing Waterworld, the game. So he's in the arcade and it says deposit 40 quarters, which is $10 to play this game. So he's there, 38, 39, 40, he presses start, he moves one step, says game over. Deposit another 40 quarters, because it's meta commentary on how shit this film was and how much it cost. Somebody's coded this up, so I downloaded it yesterday and put it on my computer, right? And literally, you stand there putting the quarters in, and then you press start, and it just says game over. Deposit another 40 quarters. I'm like, That was the most amazing thing I've ever played in my life. I felt like Millhouse. It was amazing. It's in the game. Yeah, well, I interact. It's got this kind of physicality about it. You know, I've got control, and and there's kind of something satisfying about moving the hand over to the slot where you put the quarters in. Is it persistent? For that period of time, yeah, it is. You know, it is persistent for that period of time. So, really, you should be able to boil down any game into those core constituent parts. If you have something which doesn't fit those, that might be problematic. Some people get hung up on the persistence thing. I think persistence is, in terms of games in general, persistence relates to the experience that we have when we're playing them itself. Is it something where we have a period of time where it feels not disjointed, where it could take years, it could be 10 minutes, it could be Candy Crush or something like that. Persistence can work in different ways. So persistent virtual environments where people experience others as being there with them. That doesn't need to say that they're other human beings. They can be others of different kinds. If you're playing a solo game, you are still usually interacting with others. And where you can interact with them. And in particular, with online game, this works even better because the others are genuine others. Albeit, do you ever question whether everyone you play Overwatch with is real?
Not Overwatch, but I've played other games and been like,
yeah,
right, there's no way that these people are actually real.
There's not just evidence, we know.
Yeah.
Games companies do drop non-playable characters on online games, definitely. Synchronous persistent network of people represented by avatars, facilitated by network computers. These kind of definitions really relate to games like Overwatch and so on, which, where you have other people in. What I would strip out to them and say, there's no reason we couldn't apply that to something like Modern Warfare, because that network of other people in digital games, the other characters, when we're in the game, we consider them to be a relevant part of our experience as other people as well. So, if we're always dropped into virtual worlds, what we need to consider is that the experience of all virtual worlds is unique. Just as Josh was saying about Dead Space, right? That you've got this unique subjective experience of something that, when we lay it out, we could make an argument that everyone's going to play this the same way, but we don't. And what I always want to draw out of this is, these are different from other media because they are entered, not viewed. We don't view virtual worlds, we are part of them. We are in them in a particular way. We are not looking at a film, we are in it. There's a fundamental difference. I know you can have a cinematic experience, like where you feel extremely immersed in the film that you're watching, to the extent to which you empathise with the characters and you empathise with the story and you really resonantly feel part of what's going on in the action in that time. But there is another step here. We are in the world in a particular way. We are actors and active actors in that world. And we play a part in how it works. So there is something fundamentally different. I thought this was going to be about ideology. Well, that relationship and that embodied experience that we have transforms, or when we say in media studies something is transformed, what is the word that we use? It is it's a clue in the title of the subject, media studies.
Mediation?
Who said that? You cheat. PhD students are not allowed to answer. You should know that, I'm hoping. Mediation. Mediation, right? So, we are not in a film, we're not watching something. The world for ourselves is mediated by the actions that we have in them, and we are continually mediating the world ourselves as well. Now, David Dunkel, who I set reading for this week, is the first chapter of his book. The context for Gunkel comes from context for any kind of new world, that idea of the new world as a quotation. In all discursive statements, basically, new world comes from the idea that Europeans went to North America from the 1500s onwards and created the new world, which is a creation of conquest and colonialism. And other things that we actually miss out here, slavery and genocide. Those are fundamental parts of that conquest and colonialism. This metaphor of the new world has been used to describe cyberspace by John Perry Barlow and Tim Leary and others like this. Even Benjamin Woolley was talking specifically about virtual reality in the early 90s, and this idea of non-space was like, computer space is something that we can make anything of. But any kind of computerized created space like that is always going to be open to exploration and settlement. And basically this is a long history of how we view video games ideologically as spaces for utopias, this utopian idea, but almost always the games that try to embody this idea of creating a new world, they take classic, dominant, elite ideologies about the world, like Sims, where the purpose of Sims is to do what?
To create or control
Control. How does a Sim get the kind of optimum level of happy? What do you have to do? What do they have to do? Buy. They do stay alive, yeah, but what do they... How do you stay alive? How do you keep your Sim alive?
For your needs.
Like, which are?
Toilet.
Food,
Bed.
happiness, hygiene,
Social.
energy.
Yeah, how does all that happen in the game?
By clicking on things.
Yeah. But so by clicking on things, you're doing what?
Performing actions.
Yeah, you are. And what does the clicking on stuff give you?
Control.
People-
Control over the sim. You may choose to fulfill their activities. You may not choose
Okay,
to fulfill their
okay.
activities.
Leaps over the top, and that is all correct, yeah. How does your Sim eat?
Sometimes automatically, when especially in the modern age, when the bar gets really low, he just does it himself. He just goes to the fridge. And
Do you
gets
not
it.
need to provide it?
No, you eat to just fulfill a goal.
But they can starve.
They can starve, yeah, if you want. them to
How do you
starve.
stop your Sim from starving?
You feed them. That's like Tamagotchi, isn't
You
it?
buy them food.
Thank you!
Yeah.
Jesus! Okay, I could have, because at any point in that in the set of statements, I could have said, Cheska, how do you stop from starving? You buy food, right? Now, how do you get the money to buy food?
Dad.
How does Dad get the money to give to you? Oh, that's a fantastic answer, by the way, I love it. But how...
Working.
He works. Okay. So your father trades his labour for capital, and then he gives it to you so you can eat.
Yeah.
Perfect. This is almost the ideal. I love it. This is what happens, right? It's like, you're going to be Arthur Morgan, right? And in order to progress in that game, you're going to have to do things which will give you money, which will allow you to buy X, which will mean you can upgrade up, etc., etc. You get a better horse, you can get a better campsite, you can afford better baths in these places which look suspiciously like prostitution, and etc., etc. So that kind of classical capitalist system, you think about Fallout in this context, it fits perfectly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, Fallout 4, I would argue, is like, how can we re-establish the old order in this chaotic sort of world?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these you know, even in the 90s, people were making arguments, and you think to the 90s and the kind of the basicness of games then compared to now, it was still, you know, Mario, etc. What are you being asked to do? You are being asked to conquer an environment, to make it in a particular way. Once you do that, you are rewarded really within the confines of what capitalism would consider a reward system. So, there is a substantial literature that says that game building and game worlds themselves reproduce it's not reproducing just the dominant ideologies of capitalist society. They're a very specific set of dominant ideologies around colonialization and the horror, because colonialization is just about the worst ideological sort of position that there is. What do colonialists do? They steal land off other people and wipe out their culture, and very often wipe them out. That's what colonialism is. The history of colonialism is the history of let's kill a hell of a lot of people and make it ours. And this is a primary ideological position of a lot of video games. Right, it's 11 o'clock, let's take 5 and then we'll finish up after that. I'm going to leave that run. Mason's got it. Look out.
Yes, this is the joke.
Not a vegetarian.
Full black.
We can just a future game because it's for this one. I'm in a time of my life where money doesn't mean anything.
This is what
Yeah. Yeah. How much is it? 20 quid.
So far, I've not even put $3. I've still. Oh my God.
I'm starving.
Let's go with it.
I had a brush off bar and then man played
I figured that.
And just the animation. It's all depends if it from like moving and then there's two balls and it was a big one. That's like it.
So you can like popular.
I know. I like it a lot.
Yeah, we $7.
I can't go in. Or in second do right there.
I need to reach $10. I still have tons of coins. Oh my God. Okay. Stop the damn game.
That's it. I missed it. I missed the whole game.
Oh wait, I just have piles of top. Oh my God. Can I actually do this?